Okay, welcome everybody to the session time that we're running this session, week 2 of our 4-week GDPR Essentials course. And really good to see people here. And I'll give it just a minute for any others to join us, and then we'll make a start. As always, be running through for about probably 35-40 minutes on this one today, and then if you've got any questions, happily take the questions at the end. We should have plenty of time for that today. And yeah, still see a couple more people coming in, so just wait for them to get and joined in, and then we can make a start. Okay, I just need to remember to make sure it's recording, and it is. So, okay, here goes then. Let me share my screen. I'll get rid of that. No. Right, share that screen and share. Right, now we're away. Apologies for that. Having a bit of difficulty getting the screen that I wanted. So here we go. So welcome back if you were here last week, or indeed if you were here on Tuesday, yesterday, because this is the second time we've run this session this week. Today we're going to be focusing on writing privacy policies that are clear, compliant, and that build customer confidence, because that's so important, and perhaps sometimes an stated part of privacy policy that they help build that element of trust. Because when people know, liking, and trusting you, then hope that means that people go on and do business with you. So we're going to cover today why your privacy policy matters, core components of a privacy policy, writing for clarity and simplicity. We're going to review a real policy example, and I picked two to show you. One is the BBC website, which, as you might expect, given its status, has an absolutely excellent privacy policy. And then one from a site that I just picked at random, and to show you almost what not to do. But it's not that bad, but it's got lots of things that need improvement in it. So I will show you that. Then we'll talk about common mistakes to avoid. Then a bit about tools and templates. Then we'd have a recap and some key takeaways. And as I say, at the end, we'll have time for some questions and answers. So why does your privacy policy matter? Your privacy policy matters because it's a legal requirement. It builds transparency and it improves user trust. And all of those are important, but people perhaps get a bit carried away on it being a legal requirement. I mean, yes, it is, but GDPR done right isn't just about avoiding fines. It's about earning trust and demonstrating responsibility with people's data. You might have heard me say before that GDPR done right to me is a mindset, not a rule set. If you can get the mindset right, then the rules come simple. So what are the core components of a privacy policy? I'm going to break down each of these components so you can create or review your own policy with some confidence. First is just what data are you collecting? who from, and how are you collecting it. And then almost on the back of that is, once you've established that, then why are you collecting it? Um, oh, sorry, shouldn't have gone to that screen. Why are you collecting it? And then the based upon that, once you know what you're collecting and why you're collecting it, then what is the legal basis that you are relying on to actually process that data? Remember, there are 6 legal bases. It's not just about consent. Consent is one of them, but it could also be that you're holding the data because there's a contractual necessity to. So particularly with clients, then you actually need a consent to hold their data. You have a contractual necessity to hold their data. So it's true with your employees. You have a contractual necessity to hold your employees' data, and you don't need their permission to do that. It's there as part of the contract. If you like, you've got sort of a soft opt-in to um, handling that data. And indeed, just on a point so that people are aware, don't ask your employees to sign your privacy policy or privacy notice because they can't. It's been established in law that it must be people giving consent to a privacy policy have to be given it with consent freely and knowingly given is the phrase. And the argument is that if you have an employee, if you're an employer-employee relationship, then the employee can't freely give you their consent because they might feel in the back of their mind that, hey, if I don't sign this or if I don't tick this box, I might not have a job. And so don't rely on employers giving you consent. Rely on the fact you've got contractual necessity to hold their data. On a similar vein, it might be that you have a legal obligation to hold some data. Again, if you have clients and you're registered for VAT, then you have to hold details about the client. If you have employees, you have to hold details about your employees. If you're a charity or not-for-profit, you have to hold information about your trustees. You have a choice in that data. You have to hold it. The law says you have to hold it. Therefore, you don't actually need consent to hold it because you're holding it because the law says you must. I had a very real example of this a week or so ago, actually, with a client of mine who they were getting their accountant to draw up their final accounts. And this particular client uses lots of subcontractors. And the accountant had decided that the easiest way to get how much each subcontractor had been paid, rather than wading through piles and piles of bank statements, was to ring each contractor and ask them. And a few contractors, being sole traders, pushed back on this and said, you know, what are you doing? We don't have to give that to you. You don't have our consent to have that data. Da, 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 da. And so the client came back to me and said, how do I handle this? And I said, actually, you're fine because the accountant is fulfilling a legal obligation. He's legally obliged to make sure that the accounts that he submits are true and accurate. And therefore, if he feels he needs to contact those people, then there's no issue with you sharing those contact details, providing, and it is a providing, it's very strong providing, that the accountant uses that information only for that purpose. So he doesn't gather your subcontractors' names, email addresses, telephone numbers, and then decides, you know what, I'll send out a mailing to them, tell them what a wonderful accountant I am. No, can't do that. That's not why you gathered that information. Anyway, that's aside. Another reason for holding people's data is vital interest. Vital interest is where it's typically medical data, um, but it's in the person's interest that you hold that information. Example again, if I take the employer-employee relationship, if you've got an employee who's diabetic, then it's worth you knowing as an employer that your employee is diabetic and recording that somewhere. Because if your employee was to get ill during work time and perhaps they collapse and you need to call an ambulance, it's really, really helpful to the paramedics on the ambulance to be able to tell them, oh, by the way, he or she or they um, are diabetic, because then that governs the treatment and it governs what drugs they may or may not give that person. So, that's perfectly legitimate information to hold, and you don't need someone's consent to hold that. It's in their vital interest. The next one is public task, unless you are a in local government, either at parish council level or district or borough council level or county council level or unitary authority, anybody like that, or your government department or your government quango. You can't use public tasks as a reason for holding information. But if you are any of those, then it may well be that you're holding information as a public task. An example will be um, the information that your local authority holds so that they can collect council tax from you. They don't need your permission to do that. The law says they have to. So in fact, it falls under two things. It falls under the fact they've got a legal obligation, and it falls under the fact that they're performing a public task. And then the final one is legitimate interest. And legitimate interest, when GDPR first came out, most people shied away from legitimate interest, in part because if you're affecting any number of people or you're processing lots of data about people, then to decide on legitimate interest, you have to do something called a data privacy impact assessment. And it's quite a lengthy form, and it puts people off. But in reality, legitimate interest is simple, and you can often get away with just doing a legitimate interest assessment, which is just to say, A, is it in our legitimate interest to hold this data and do whatever it is we're proposing to do with it? And B, are we sure it's not harming the person? And you need to perform what's called the balancing test, which is taking the rights of the individual on one side, so the rights of the individual to protect their data and ensuring their data is properly protected on the one hand, and on the other hand, taking what it is you want to do. And providing what it is you want to do weighs heavier than the risk to the individual's data, fine, you can use legitimate interest as your reason for processing the data. Now, having said there's all these 6 legal bases, of course, it may well be that for any particular piece of data, you're actually using more than one of them. It doesn't have to be just one legal basis, it can be a multiple legal basis. So, moving on from there, so we now know what we've said in the privacy policy, what data we're collecting. We've said why we are collecting it. We've established a legal basis that we're using to store and process that data. So then you need to think about data sharing. So are you going to be sharing the data with anyone? And if you are, then who are they? Why are you sharing it? What are they going to do with that? And very, very importantly, where are they located, or where are they going to store the data? So it might be that if it's, let's suppose it's marketing data, and you're going to use a company to do your marketing campaign, and you're going to share the people's data, your clients' data, let's say, with that marketing company. No problem with that at all. You can cover that off. You can say we've got a data sharing agreement in place, data processing agreement in place. As long as you've got that, you can share the data with them. Happy days. However, from the point of view of your privacy policy, A, you should be disclosing that you're sharing that information with them, and B, you need to check A, that they're GDPR compliant themselves, and B, where are they storing the data? Because I had a very real example of this a couple of years ago, where a client of mine, they were using a company to process their data. Fine. That company was in London. Fine. Their data store was in India. Not so fine, because India per se is not regarded as being a adequate country as far as UK GDPR is concerned. Doesn't mean you can't use processors in India. Lots of people do, but it does mean you need to add some additional clauses onto your contract when you're dealing with those people, because you need them to agree to comply to a standard of data handling, which is at least equivalent to GDPR. And then once you've done all that, so we now know what data we're collecting. We've said that in our privacy policy, why we're collecting it, what we're doing with it. We've said that. What legal basis we're relying on. We've said that. Who we're sharing the data with. We've said that. Then we get onto retention periods. So we need to say how long we're going to keep each type of data for. And it's now been established in law that saying we will keep your data for as long as necessary is not a suitable answer. It's now established that in law you have to be precise. So you can say that we hold this data and we hold it for 7 years because that's what the law says we have to do. Or we hold this data and it's about our employees, and we are in an industry where it's known that there can be health, health and safety claims 20 years after they've left. So we're going to play safe, and we're going to decide that we're going to keep that data for 30 years from the date that someone stopped working for you. I had actually a client I was talking to this morning who, because of the nature of the work they do, they are obliged to keep their data. They work with young people under the age of 18, but they actually have to keep the data until the person is 24. And that's just laid down in their regulations. Doesn't actually matter how long that is. I mean, I work with a couple of high-level football clubs, and they keep their data for 100 years. And in their case, they can justify that because they say, well, there might be people writing books about our club or making documentaries about our club, and they might need to know who played in the 1924 FA Cup final for our team or whatever. That's fine. And in that case, I'm happy with that. I think they got suitable justification for keeping that data for 100 years. However, if you're just an average small business, I don't know, printing books, let's say, for example, I think you'd struggle to say we need to keep our employee data for 100 years. Don't try it, but I think you'd struggle. And the guideline I always use here is have a meeting, and if you're a one-man band, have a meeting with yourself, because it's important that you just document the decision. Have a meeting, decide how long you're going to hold each type of data, and make sure that you mint it, so that you can go back to it and say, we decided that we were going to hold this type of data for this length of time, and this is why. And then also don't forget to include in that statement of retention periods what you do with the data when you finish with it. How do you make sure you've destroyed that? Then, within the privacy policy, you should also encompass the rights of individuals. And I'm not going to run through each of them in any depth, otherwise it'll be all afternoon. But under GDPR, the individual have a number of rights. They have the right to be informed, they have the right of access, they have the right to rectification, they have the right to erasure, they have the right to restrict processing, they have the right to data portability, they have the right to object to processing, and they have the rights in relation to automatic profiling. And once you've done all of that, then the final bit that you need to add onto your privacy policy are contact details. So how can someone contact you if they've got a query about your privacy policy or the way you're handling data? And it's best practice to have your email address, your telephone number, and your postal address, so that if someone wants to write to you by snail mail, then they can. The other thing you have to put in the contact details is the contact details for the ICO, so that if someone really, really wants to complain, they know where they can complain to, which is they can complain to the ICO. I will add a slight caveat onto that and say that with the new data use bill that the government is pushing through Parliament, in fact, it had its second reading in, no, third reading now, in Parliament yesterday, and it's now reached ping pong stage where the House of Lords keep proposing amendments, the House of Commons keep rejecting them and sending it back to the House of Lords, and the document is just going backwards and forwards. I think that won't last much longer. I think the government will probably end up overriding the Lords on a couple of amendments that the Lords want to make, but that's nothing significant really in the golden scheme of things, because the government is committed to getting royal assent for the new bill in September. And once that comes in, there will be some changes about contact details, because there's changes in the way that complaints about the way GDPR has been handled within an organisation. It's going to change, but I won't go into detail of that today. That'll be for another training session at some point in the future, because it's a whole session by itself. But anyway, let's come back to the present day. For the present day, you need to provide details for the ICO. If you have overseas clients in the EU, then you should provide contact details for their ICO equivalent. So the equivalent of the ICO in France, Germany, wherever, you can look them up on the internet or ask ChatGPT, and you can get the contact details. However, be careful, because in a number of countries, and Germany is probably the greatest example of this, they have a national ICO, just like we do, in a National Information Commission Officer, Information Commissioner. But they've also devolved it, so each state within Germany has its own Information Commissioner's Office and Information Commissioner. And so if you deal with Germany, you need to list down all of those. And I did this for a client last week, and I think there was something like 14 of them that you need to list down. Because if someone lives in a particular state, if they live in Berlin, they have to, if they have a complaint, they have to raise it with the ICO for Berlin. And then writing for clarity and simplicity. Use plain English. A good rule of thumb is to say, could a average 13-year-old understand what you've written? And if the answer to that is yes, then you're probably about right. If the answer to that is no, then you really ought to rewrite what you've written until you think that that is now true and they can. Because it's important that you get it right, and get it in language which people can understand. Because otherwise, someone can claim that you're not being fully GDPR compliant because you haven't got it in a form which they can understand. So let's have a look at a couple of real world examples. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a second, um, and then share the screen again, because when I did this last week and just changed from screen to screen, apparently some people then couldn't see the screen. So I've stopped sharing. So I'm now going to show you share the screen again. And you should now be able to see this. So this is it's a GPT that I've pulled together. In fact, I shouldn't say pulled together. That's degenerated my own work. I spent hours working on to make it work well and be accurate. Um, and what it does is it reviews privacy policies and it checks for clarity and transparency, lawful basis and data collection, rights of data subject, processes and sharing, security, retention, international transfers, cookies, contacts and complaints, and overall GDPR readiness. So I fed it the BBC one, and as you might expect, it says that the BBC privacy policy has exceptionally clear layout and accessible language. It's designed to be user-friendly and jargon-free. It uses section menus, definitions, and Q&A formatting to improve navigation. Lawful basis, it clearly sets out their lawful basis. However, the bot is suggesting that the BBC covers a wide range of services. In some cases, further segmentation of legal basis per service might aid user understanding. Um, Data subject rights, it's got all those right. Data set sharing and processing, it's got all those right. Although again, the bots picked up the fact that even the BBC site doesn't provide a public list of their processors. Um, Security measures, retention and deletion. Um, and again, the bots picked up that they don't actually have a retention schedule. So although they say they retain things, they say things as long as necessary. Um, International transfers, they cover all that well. Cookies and tracking, they cover all that well. Contact and complaints, they can do all that well. So the final assessment is that it's to a high compliance standard, and BBC's privacy policy is a strong example of GDPR best practice. It balances transparency, accessibility, and thoroughness without overwhelming the user. Most areas are fully compliant and presented in a way that supports public trust. Whoopie-doo, gold star for the BBC. Um, and given their status, really wouldn't expect anything else. However, I then picked this organisation totally at random. They appeared for some reason in a search I was doing, and so I thought, I know I'll use their privacy policy. I didn't pre-check it. I didn't know what this was going to come out with, whether it would be good or bad. But let's look at what it says for them. So, strengths, the tone is clear and friendly, aligning well with consumer-facing lifestyle brand, and it identifies the data controller. Well, that's good. But areas for improvement, structure to benefit from section numbering or an index, and a brief summary or FAQ at the top could help users navigate. Okay, fair enough. Data collection on a legal basis, the policy doesn't mention which legal basis the processing is being performed under Article 6 of UK GDPR. And it's got no reference to special category data. Special category data seems like health data, um, whether you're a member of a political party, whether you're a member of a trade union, all that sort of jazz. And it's silent on that. It's got no reference to special category data at all. And while it states we collect personal data and give some examples, the list is incomplete. And so it suggests what to do to put that right. Data subject rights, it states that users have rights under UK GDPR. Brilliant. But it doesn't specify how to access those, to exercise those rights. It's got no mention of how quickly the organisation will respond, which is typically a month or 30 days. And it lacks information on the right to complain to the ICO. In terms of data sharing and processors, it just says that data may be shared with partners and service providers, but it doesn't list them down, doesn't give any detail of who they are. and has no mention about data processing agreements or how Helm ensures that their processes are themselves GDPR compliant. Security measures, it states they take reasonable and appropriate measures, but again, it's saying that it lacks technical or organization security. It lacks any detail in that section, essentially. In terms of data retention and deletion, how long you're going to keep the data, their privacy policy doesn't mention it at all. So it's a big red cross because it's a big omission. Likewise, it doesn't mention whether they transfer any data overseas or not. And then, although the privacy policy references cookies, it doesn't have a dedicated cookie policy and it doesn't have a cookie banner, you know, the little banner that appears along the bottom of the screen that you have to tick the first time you go onto a website. That annoys the hell out of everybody, but unfortunately should be there. And then in terms of contacts and complaints, it offers just a general contact email, doesn't mention whether they've got DPO or not, and doesn't mention at all about the Information Commissioner's Office. And so the final assessment here is that it's only got partial compliance and needs strengthening. And as you can see, quite a lengthy list of things that actually they need to do to make that website and make that privacy policy fully GDPR compliant. So I'm going to stop sharing again, go back to my slides. He says, hopefully. No, come back. From current slide. That's better. Okay, so that's a real world example. So let me just get to where we are, and then we can carry on from there. So, common mistakes to avoid. Yeah, don't be too vague. Don't be too technical. A really common mistake to avoid is making sure that you're updating your privacy policy regularly. I've come across too many that have not been updated in a long, long time. For me, as a GDPR professional, one of the things that raises a real red flag for me if I look at a website is either, well, A, if they don't have a privacy policy at all, but B, if their privacy policy still mentions the Data Protection Act 1998, because that no longer applies, there's now Data Protection Act 2018. And indeed, as I was saying, coming the end of this year, everyone's privacy policy will need updating to include the reference to the new law. The other thing that again, is an alarm bell that says people haven't updated their privacy policy for a long time is that prior to GDPR, you used to be able to charge people £10 for access to their data, and you're not allowed to do that anymore. You have to do it for free. So it still mentions about the £10. I know damn well people that they're not updating their privacy policy. And the other thing with privacy policy as well is ignoring the user experience. Make it a pleasant experience. Because A, you've got to demonstrate compliance, and B, documentation and training are key ways to show that you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So tools and templates. Templates can be a good place to start. We ourselves have a template, and happy to make that available to anyone who's on this call. But with a template, always be careful. You know, because again, I mentioned things that act as a red flag, big red flag. And I actually saw this on a website last week. I went onto the website, as I do, I went and checked their privacy policy, had a look at their privacy policy, and their privacy policy started with this is the privacy policy of open square brackets, enter company name here, close square brackets. Methinks you took a template and just literally plonked it on your website. The other thing I will say, and it's a big one, is please, whatever you do, don't steal a privacy policy from somebody else's website. A, technically you're infringing their intellectual property, but B, when you think about all those sections that have to be in it that we spent 10 minutes going through a little while ago, what are the chances of all 10 of those being exactly the same for that company as they are for you? Pretty slim, I would say. So please don't do it. If you use a template, get a template, that's fine. If you're going to get a template, make sure you know who's providing the template and they've got a good reputation. Because absolutely it's one of the faults, I think, in UK law, across the internet generally, is if I wanted to set up on a high street as a solicitor and I've got no qualifications as a solicitor, I didn't do that. I'd be breaking all sorts of regulations doing that. But if I want to write a template to put a legal template, not just about GDPR, by the way, it can be about any section of law. If I want to write a template about a particular section of law and tell people to use that template, I can just do that. Don't need any legal qualifications at all. Don't need any qualifications at all, actually. Don't even need to be based in the UK, come to that. So just be cautious if you're buying templates. Use the old adage of, I mean, okay, I mentioned that for people who come on this course, I'm happy to provide your template for free, but because you paid a reasonable sum of money to come on this course. Beware of people who are willing to sell you a template for 20 quid. Really? You really think it's going to be any good? You really think it's going to be up to date? And also be wary of things like the FSB. The FSB, great organisation that they are. I have a lot of time for the FSB. I'm an FSB member myself. But a lot of their templates on their website are so generic that you really do need to pay a lawyer to tweak them into what's going to be suitable for you. So just be careful with templates is really what I'm saying. So, recap and key takeaways. Clarity builds trust. Make sure you update your policy regularly. And make sure that you make it accessible. I mean that in two ways, actually, inaccessible. A, it should be an easy read. B, you should have a link to it from every page on your website. So it shouldn't be. I actually had this situation several weeks ago now with a website I was looking at. It wasn't a client of mine. It was something I was looking to buy. And I went onto this website and scrolled down to the bottom where normally you'd expect to find a link to the privacy policy. Not there. I thought, okay, I'll scroll right up to the top and down on the top menu, select, look at all the different options. Not there. I thought they haven't got a privacy policy. That was my instant assumption. They'd not got a privacy policy. Ah, but they did. They had a privacy policy. I missed it. Because you had to fill in the contact form first. And then when it took you to the thank you page for filling in the contact form, it showed you their privacy policy. Yeah. I don't know who gave them that idea, but not the best advice in the world. Your privacy policy should be there, it should be clear, it should be honest, it should be up to date, and it should be everywhere. So with that, that concludes today's presentation. Thank you very much for watching. The slides from this presentation and your session 2 workbook will be sent out to you by email either later this afternoon or tomorrow. And yeah, just remember to keep your privacy policy up to date. And with that, I am going to end the slideshow. Thanks for joining. If it sparked ideas or if it sparked any questions, I'd love to connect. Let's make your GDPR journey not just compliant, but confident and customer first. And that's so, so important. So I'm going to end the slideshow and stop sharing. And I will get back to this page. And if anyone's got any questions, please either just raise a hand or put a question in the chat. And I will do my best to answer the question for you. No, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so either I bored you all to sleep or that was really, really useful. I hope it was the second one. So don't forget, we'll be back next week with session 3. As normal, we'll be doing it in twice during the week at 9:30 on Tuesday morning and at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. So if you miss one session, you can always come to the second one, or you can come to both if you really, really want to. But it's just a repeat of each session. Hope that's been really useful, and thank you very much for being here. And with that, I will say see you next week.